I used to be obsessed with Pokemon, and I started playing Axie Infinity. So I've been a huge fan of Web3 gaming. I'm here really to learn. Um, a little bit about me. I work in the Near ecosystem, so I lead community in Near SF. So we are a technical community of developers and founders. If you want to talk about that, come talk to me. But I'll let Miko and all the speakers also introduce themselves. And then at the end, we're also going to have 1 minute pitches. So if you have something to say about what you're working on, whether that's a co-founder, your company, we'll have that after the questions of the panel. So yeah.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, my name is Miko, as Alejandro mentioned, and I'm actually one of the co-founders of Crypto Underground. So we have been doing this for a number of years. So today we're going to be talking about Web3 gaming. So one of the things in the house of Web3, so I assume all of you are Web3 people, but my question is, how many of you are gamers? So raise your hand if you're a gamer. Okay, that's good news, right? That means we can just go straight there. We can just start talking about games and what we're playing these days. So I think the best way to start is to have a sequential round of introductions, and I'm going to have each of my panelists introduce themselves. I think it should be about a 2-minute introduction, and I feel like you should start with a game that you're playing, and it should either be, it doesn't matter if it's Web 2 or Web 3, right? You should just, and if it's an obscure game, you can describe what it is, and then of course you should go on to actually explain kind of why the audience should pay attention to what you're saying, which may have to do with your background and why you're here. So for me, I'm with Gumi Cryptos Capital. We're a venture investor. We have a $110 million fund too, and we're like prolifically investing. My partner, who's based in Tokyo, actually founded a company in Japan called the Gumi Games Corporation. That is our kind of sister company. And there he took that public as a unicorn, and they've done mobile titles like Final Fantasy and some other really big kind of hit games. So like he's definitely big in the gaming sector. So we are also excited about Web3. So we're a crypto native venture fund. And the game that I'm playing these days is actually an indie Web2 game called RimWorld, which is a survival base builder. Yeah. And I'm just really obsessed with kind of AI-based agents and kind of parameterized sort of storytelling. So it's a game where you basically parameterize the user interfaces, you set up policies and parameters, and then the game basically plays itself, right? Which is kind of insane, and it sounds kind of not that fun until you maybe die like 300 times in a row, and then losing becomes the whole point of the game. So maybe I like losing because it's a game that is about the funness of losing and dying. And I play in hardcore mode where you can't save, so you just die forever. So that's pretty fun. Nicole, you're up next.
All right. So Nicole Lazaro, for those of you who haven't met, and currently just starting Return to Monkey Island. Any fans of that? And Firmament, which isn't the Cyan's latest title. So I backed the Kickstarter. And I'm taking the ideas, I really like story and puzzle games. And I'm bringing those kinds of mechanics or those kinds of experiences, like you're in a movie that you can interact with, into our new title, which is Follow the White Rabbit. And in terms of me, well, among other things, I designed the first iPhone game, was the first person to measure emotion on people's faces while they played. So our 4 Keys to Fun is used by millions of developers around the world, everything from Assassin's Creed to Candy Crush. And it's baked in the AI for The Sims, those kinds of things. And then I'm heavily into the XR space, again, with the working that we're doing on the title. You can also look me up. I've got a TED Talk. There are no wimps in the metaverse. So I do a lot on UX and what's happening. There are no windows, icons, mice, pointers, or solo play is what I mean there. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, so just in case you missed the point, the thing that's really interesting about the way I met Nicole actually is I studied her research, and it was basically defining what fun is in gaming. So like that's pretty astonishing research, very deep stuff. So super appreciate it. So Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and I'm a game designer game economist at Limit Break, right? It's a paradigm bet company. And before that, I was an investor at Delphi Digital, which is a member managed fund, it's crypto native fund as well, right? And used to invest in crypto gaming there, as well as published a lot of research. I tweeted a lot during my time at Delphi. So as for games, I got excited when Miko mentioned RimWorld because it's one of the games I always like sort of highlight. It's like, wow, this is a very interesting example of like game design that goes beyond kind of like, the interface or like image first kind of game design, right? It's all about like actually innovation on what a game is. So Tynan Sylvester actually talks about how RimWorld is not built to be a game, but a story generator, right? Because a game is about being fair. It's about, giving you positive feedback when you're doing well. RimWorld is about giving you an interesting story, right? That's why hardcore mode. That's why they don't care if you're doing well or you're doing horrible, as long as it's a good story. So that's RimWorld. What I'm playing right now is Diablo 4. I don't think anyone needs an introduction to Diablo 4.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so I'm a bull lance necromancer, just blow everything up. It's good. Yeah. So yeah, looking forward to talking about the future of Web3 gaming. Thanks.
Yeah, awesome. And Ryan and I have had many kind of like jam sessions talking about everything from philosophy all the way, Nietzsche all the way down to Web3 games. So, it's been really fun. So, Sherwin?
I feel like your interest in Nietzsche kind of explains why you like RimWorld and dying over and over again. Maybe those two might be connected somehow. I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
That which does not kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly. Well, it's nice to meet everyone. My name's Sherwin. I lead gaming partnerships at Aptos Labs, which is a layer 1 blockchain. Prior to that, I was actually in investment banking. So I left the dark worlds of Wall Street for the dark worlds of Web3 and crypto. I covered gaming when I was at Morgan Stanley. So worked on things like the Roblox direct listing and the Unity Iron Source merger. I am currently playing a lot of Marvel Snap, and I'm one of those bounce spider pig abusers. So if you're cursing at your opponent while he turns your Hulk and your high evolution or your what's it called, Infinite into pigs over and over again, that might be me. So I apologize for nothing.
Yeah, so Marvel Snap, for those of you who haven't been following, it's basically IP game. So it's all your favorite Marvel superheroes, and it's essentially card mobile, this type of thing. So, it's a definitely very, very astonishing use of IP and very, very successful at it. So I kind of want to actually flip straight over to Sherwin, right? Because as someone who's working at Aptos with the gaming community, I think your deal flow in kind of high quality games is actually pretty high, right? So what I would love to kind of get from you are kind of descriptions of maybe your top 2 or 3 games in Web3 that you're actually the most impressed by, right? So, Sherwin, if you could just say, like, what are the most impressive Web3 games that you've seen, whether on Aptos or not, but like you've seen a lot of games.
Yeah, I think a really exciting game that's coming to Aptos somewhere near the end of this year is by a Korean company called nPixel, and it's called Grand Saga Unlimited. So Grand Saga was the Web2 version of this game that nPixel had launched, very popular in Korea. And so Grand Saga Unlimited is kind of the Web3 version of that. And I think what is really exciting about it is they are pushing lots of boundaries about what Web3 can be. Some of that is because the token standard that they've developed in collaboration with us. But one of the things, for example, that they're doing is treating NFTs or digital collectibles like they were users. And what that allows them to do is kind of put items inside other items and trade them. So if you think about, you mentioned Diablo 4, Ryan, right? You think about putting items with sockets and stuff like that, kind of taking 2 NFTs and crafting a third one out of them where the original gem is burned, it's become something new. That's something that's pretty interesting.
Quick question. Does that leverage properties of the Move programming language for object orientation? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So Miko, definitely done your homework. So we are built on Move. I don't know how much of that is unique to Move, as in I don't know if that's not possible on EVM or something like that. So if someone else here knows, please let me know. But it's probably definitely facilitated by the program.
Yeah, I mean, language. I think this idea of kind of hierarchical objects and embedding objects, I think that is kind of an interesting property of a more object-oriented paradigm. So what I did want to kind of reflect on here is you were talking about Grand Saga, another kind of Korean game house that's quite interesting is Maple Story, right? So I don't know if you've been following Maple Story, but obviously that's a pretty, I would say, maybe upper mid-tier IP, right? And they've gone blockchain. Ryan, do you have a comment?
They came out free to play.
Yeah.
They came out free to play. Did fine.
Defined free to play. I mean,
Yeah.
not like Cartwriter and some other ones, but yeah.
Cash shop and all these things. 90-day expiry.
Yeah, so which is
And
wonderful.
Cosmetics trading.
And I would love to kind of have Nicole unpack a little bit about the advent of free to play and then the relationship between free to play and Web3 gaming. So Nicole, maybe you can jump in.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, what was interesting as I took my research to Seoul actually, and I was videotaping people playing in the PC Bong, and what's interesting is that at that point in time, piracy was so rampant in Asia that they invented new genres. And as long as the game was happening up in the cloud, then you couldn't pirate as much. You had these social spaces where you could come and rent time on a computer to play games. And then how do you monetize that? So I think it was a really great example of how you had a business and player problem. It leveraged a new technology, which in turn changed both gameplay and business models. And I think we're in the same boat here. We're in the same point in time with blockchain, of course, as the new technology, and we will get the same thing. We're going to get new game designs, new monetization models.
So one thing I wanted to respond, and I wanted to throw this one over to Ryan, who's kind of working at Limit Break on some of these ideas, right? Which is that in comparing something like free to play with Web3 gaming, we're actually talking about distribution, right? That really the focus of the idea isn't on necessarily gameplay. It's actually focused on user acquisition, right? It's more focused on the actual channel strategy, right? So I guess, how do you think about sort of Web3 from a distribution perspective rather than from a gameplay perspective?
So I can't claim to represent Limit Break's full views here, right? But what I will say is that if you give away NFTs away for free, people want them, right?
Yes. Yeah. That increases people's want. Yeah.
Yes. And in free to play, right, as Nicole was mentioning, right, previous model was the box game, right? And then, piracy was a problem, and that led to free to play. Because now you sell people items, and those items live on servers, right? Now that the free to play moving to Web3, I think the sort of naive view moving towards like Web3 is that instead of selling something that in Web2, it's just an item on a server, you can sell something that people can trade, right? And it's sort of strictly better for the player. They want like a Web3 version of the item instead of Web2 one. However, the challenge that comes with that potentially is that you kind of cannibalize your primary market revenue, right? So that's a sort of an interesting challenge there as well to self-consider. But as for distribution, the question of distribution, yeah, user acquisition is tough.
So
Yeah.
so here's a fascinating thing, which is if you actually look at what's happening now, like it's about 3.7 billion worldwide gamers, give or take, right? More than half in Asia, right? Very, very large, right? And the thing that's really happened is that user acquisition is like pretty utterly broken in sort of traditional Web2 gaming, right? I think obviously the Apple privacy settings debacle has kind of destroyed a lot of the traditional channels, right? So like distribution is a big problem, right?
So that meant that the game actually had to be fun.
Oh, wow. This is really good. At GamesBeat, where we were both in attendance, actually, there was an executive, and it was an Amazon exec, commenting about IP. And her comment, which I loved, was, this is a little related to funness, right? Which is that she said that IP licensing is double-edged, right? And it's double-edged because you have to be appealing to new players, but you have to respect the fans. And to me, this is actually really, to me, the thing that's so fun is that like you have a major industry executive talking about how you have to respect the fans of the IP, which is kind of like, that's not what the history books have shown, right? History books have shown in gaming that it's fine to trample on IP and it's fine to abuse the fans of the IP. Not anymore, right? So I think it speaks a little bit to this idea that you have to have a more, like these major companies now actually have to be more respectful.
Yeah, because I think that we had a really great game going, right? In terms of, that was my alarm. Sorry about that.
Crickets.
Crickets, yeah. Yeah, or it says snooze, Nicole, you're boring. But but seriously, on a more serious note, is that we had a really good ride going. If you throw enough money at, in a certain way, you could get enough people to pay attention, and then enough math-wise, you would get your users, right? And you could micro-target them through the way the old system worked. And so by upending it, I think it's just driving a whole new innovation, the real push for innovation in gameplay and the game offerings. And I think the players will actually win, because businesses are going to be forced to look at the value proposition leading for user acquisition. But feel free to disagree.
So I totally want to support the players will win thesis, because I think that the concept of gamer-centric transmedia is here, and I think that gamer culture has become culture. And I think the case study that I would like to provide is that if you look at the Super Mario movie, right? If you just go look at that on Rotten Tomatoes, what you're going to realize is that no critics liked this movie. Like, all the critics were like, this is a horrible movie. And all the fans loved it, right? And this is $1 billion box office, right? So this is a huge, huge success, displacing the previous all-time top seller of video game movies, which was World of Warcraft movie, which is the most offensive trampling of IP that in the history of game movies, right? I mean, that was patently offensive, right? Whereas the Mario movie was just filled with Easter eggs. And this is my new gold standard for, is this player centric? Is, can you understand what the on-screen movie characters are doing based on controller actions? Right. So for example, if you're watching Mario, is he doing a B dash, or what is he doing on screen relative to a controller? Right. So if you look at something like Netflix Arcane, right, obviously if you see Jinx firing Super Mega Death Rocket, she's pressing R, right? That's gamer centric.
Well, you do. I mean, in the Dungeons and Dragons movie, you could kind of also get that a little bit.
Beautiful
example. But I think more important is that, in addition to the controls, is what are the player emotions? Because without emotion, there's no game. Without emotion, there's no engagement. And at the very core psychology is we need to create that. And so we've worked on a lot of franchises, Star Wars and Matrix and Mad Magazine, all kinds of crazy. If you take the emotions that players love feeling and then map them to the game mechanics, or in a movie, take the mechanics, those create emotions, map those emotions to the movie. If it's creating the same emotions, in the settings and that sort of thing, then that's what will also drive a lot of player happiness.
So I want to talk about distribution, come back to that theme of distribution. And one of the fascinating things that we're seeing is, because of the lack of growth, we're starting to see business models for example, the Xbox Pass, right? And the pass is basically really based on more of an idea of loyalty, right? But it's not loyalty to any title, right? So the idea becomes that retention becomes basically the king of the universe, because there isn't that much new growth. There isn't that. So really it all becomes retention. And the question becomes then, what is the impact of NFT and these types of assets on things like loyalty? So I'd love to kind of have anyone, I'm throwing it open. So if anyone wants to jump in on the topic of loyalty, yeah, Sherwin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I think it is definitely true that, retention is just, anyone here who has built a game, right, probably knows retention is the metric that you live and die by, right? You can have all the new user acquisition in the world, but, at Old Cold, when we were in investment banking, we looked at these companies, we called them leaky buckets, right? You'd fill the top, and then it would just be leaking out the top. And so it would just be user acquisition spend going nowhere. And so retention is really, you spent all that money for a user, keeping him and her in your game is infinite ROI, because that's a CAC already spent, right? It's just thing that you're monetizing on. I think what we found in Web3 games, and there aren't too many apples to apples comparisons, but I think what we've seen is retention in Web3 games is actually higher than corresponding retention in Web2 games. The hypothesis is that it's because, players have an economic incentive to be playing the game. Well, actually, there's two explanations for this. One is because there's an economic incentive to keep playing the game. And two is because the residual value of this game, once you're done playing it, is not zero, right? In a traditional Web2 game, once you're done playing a game, you're done, and there's nothing more to do with that, and your value, is just kind of goes to nothing, right? In a Web3 game, you can sell your items, you could trade them for someone else, for something else. far off into the future, when interoperability becomes a thing, you could potentially port those assets into something else. And I think those are all reasons of why, retention, it makes sense that retention is higher in Web3 games.
I would also like to interject too, which is that the idea of loyalty is not necessarily loyalty that accrues to a game title, right? It may be actually loyalty that accrues to the entire brand, IP, universe, franchise, right? Because
Tribalism.
because of the idea that, so to me, I'm pretty excited because when we talk about Super Mario movie, right, we're talking about a multi-generational, like, borderline 4-quadrant transmedia franchise, right? So we're talking about something that is perpetual, right? So the thing that kind of becomes really exciting about the idea of, perpetual objects, like blockchain-based perpetual internet objects, is that their relationship to perpetual IP and kind of the idea of quote unquote franchise becomes really interesting, right? Because if you own an IP object or interesting thing in a game, right, they can release another game and it could potentially have the same item, right? So in a sense, you could reward loyal users over time, right? It's possible to. It's also possible to trample those users, but it's up to, it's possible to reward users over a period of time longer than a single game, which I think is quite interesting.
And I think, if you wanted to dig more into this question, outside this panel, is that this is also a trend with the major publishers. Is that you get the, if you think about the recent price tick on traditional console games, whether it was Zelda, or others, the publishers for the big AAA franchises, they want to own that player for a year. So they're putting the price point way up there. So you're only going to buy that Call of Duty. You're only going to buy that one game. And they really are thinking a lot about lifetime value of the players and really driving that. So, if you want to dig in more to that topic, I think there's some really interesting parallels for Web3.
I think there's some also additional excitement around the idea of Web3 as this kind of on-ramp into the broader crypto universe, right? Because the thing that becomes quite interesting is what if you could have basically mobile game CAC, but you have financial services LTV? Like this gets really, I mean, Sherwin's background in, investment banking and this kind of mindset, that's an insane math, right?
It is, but I think I would urge caution before everyone's eyes rotates around and turns into dollar signs here, right?
I saw a few back there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the I think it's important to remember that. You talked about, Nicole, you talked about network effects before and like LTV and things like that, right? I think one of the interesting things about games, in particular social games, is that games are just network effects businesses, right? And network effects businesses are very powerful once they're going, but they're hard to start, right? And if you're the only person in the world with a telephone, that telephone is useless. It's only when everyone else has a telephone that that thing actually becomes valuable. The interesting thing about Web3 games is it presents kind of a solution to how do you get the snowball rolling, because there are all these incentives, economic or otherwise, that you can get for your early users. You talked about rewarding loyalty, right? Here's if you bought an NFT during the initial mint, you get some sort of either badges or some sort of rights, and that's a pretty potent way to get the snowball rolling. I think the flip side of that, though, is like you said, if you set up your incentives in a way that are too financially attractive, and you get people who are traders and economically incentives, they're not going to behave like players. And so when you think about your game as being full of players, and then they end up coming in, staying, and flipping very quickly, and you're like, why are all my players churning and getting out? It's because you didn't attract game players, you attracted traders.
Yeah. So I think what he's describing is actually play to earn, right? Which is the biggest problem with play to earn is you're ascribing an intent, right? That's the purpose, right? It's like, well, why are you playing? We are playing to earn, right? So the thing that happens in that scenario is exactly what happens to DeFi, right? Which is that it eventually becomes sort of mercenary, right? It becomes very mercenary. It's like, I can earn more over here. Bye-bye.
Good meme though. I mean, while they're in the ecosystem, they still, contribute to your revenue, right? They still trade 2.5%, 4.25%, still goes back to the company, to the protocol. Treasury still get built up. right?
But if you're
Yeah.
but if you're going into the world of games, you're going into games because of games have a lot of stickiness. They have a lot of repeat use. They've got a lot of actions that are taken virtually, and they will chew through content if you have story, which is one thing we're working on. But they've got so that's the reason why, and the reason why why players would play is because they want new experiences. They want to have the value from interacting with the game environment and then with each other. And so when we think about it just being a stock market, Wall Street's not a game. I mean, it can be a game, but it's not really a game. It's not what you want. Is you want to load in, I want to log into like a Web3 game and play Real Estate Tycoon, or I want to play Risk, so a territory game like Risk. You want to have game mechanics that are happening on top of the blockchain. We don't play like assembler games. We don't play C# games. We don't really play blockchain games. We're trying to almost label the genres by the technology that's supporting them. And I think that's a mistake from the player's point of view. You absolutely need the financials and the technology and everything else to make that run. But without that top layer of play, and if you know any of my research on the 4 keys, you want to be sure that that it's all about internal incentives, intrinsic incentives. And if you talk about money or finances, that's an extrinsic representation, a symbol of value. And so it can really mess up with the joy. Because if I tell you if you do something and I pay you, that's work. That's what's called work.
Nicole, I would love to ask, you've done research on like putting electrodes on like players' brains when they're like playing games and things like that, right? Or like mapping brain signals and emotions and things like that.
I've done research more in the not with electrodes, but with watching player emotions.
Have you ever done any comparative research on someone who's playing what we'll call like a first wave of the Web3 games versus like another game, and how those two are different? Or
yeah, we don't have a lot of data on Web3 because they're kind of snooze fest somewhat.
Some of them are.
Some of them are. But yeah, no, what we did is we looked at micro expressions. So how often do they emote and what kind of emotions? And so we found that players play for 4 reasons. They play for novelty, they play for challenge, they play for friendship, and they play for meaning or creating value. And that meaning and creating value is not, ka-ching, I just won the stock market. The meaning and value is really more about changing how they think, how they feel, or how they behave. So now I feel much more relaxed because I played a game, or now I played a game of basketball and my friends and I are just super chummy. I feel connected to everybody. Those are some of the other things. And we can read a lot of them through the emotions that you can measure on the face, in particular. And so there's that layer. It's almost just like another layer. We talk about layer 1 blockchain, right? There's a player layer that needs to get designed.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the fascinating tensions that kind of has emerged in the panel that I want to accentuate and I'm enjoying is that, in a sense, like, I think Ryan is reflecting an attitude of more like, how do you really engage this kind of animal spirit, right? Because in a sense, there is sort of like greed, and then people also can start shilling, right? So that becomes kind of word of mouth distribution for your game, right? So there's almost kind of like this evil side, right? But then in a way, like,
I don't want to be associated.
He is dressed all in black here.
Evil
It's a very
side,
it's a very
the
on
evil
brand.
side, yeah, and then exactly. And then Nicole is reflecting more about story and about fun, right? And I think it's more reflective of her sort of background from the traditional gaming world, which is really, to me, like, if I were to kind of weigh in, like, my philosophy is absolutely kind of maybe more aligned with Nicole in the sense that, like, I really do see gaming as an entertainment industry, right? So as an entertainment industry, it's basically people are paying in, right? And that's how the industry kind of increases. And what they're paying for is they're paying for fun, right? That's the nature of it. Because the reason why I'm focused on such a nonsensical thing to say is because if you look at Ponzi-nomic games like Axie, or if you look at games like Steppen, which is like barely, calling it a game is almost an insult to games, is that nobody is paying for you to walk around the block 8 times, right? So if you're playing Steppen, the economic input isn't there, right? Like, the economic input is dependent on more players coming in to buy shoes, right? Which isn't And why are they buying shoes? So that they can make money walking around the block, right? So to me, the entertainment industry depends on people being entertained, right? And like the people walking around the block are, they're barely being entertained. And the way they're being entertained is, oh, I'm making money, right? Like that's the thing that causes them to be entertained. I think it's a lot closer to kind of casino than it is to gaming.
Not only
And
that,
casino isn't kind of classical entertainment. I think it's something else.
well, it's been around for a while. It is a type of human engagement, and we've studied a lot of gambling. I've smuggled cameras into Vegas and didn't get caught, which was remarkable. But I think what also too is that it's for extrinsic reward, again, money. That in like casual gaming, we found that only 10% of players play for points. 90% are playing for some other reasons. So if the only reason to play your blockchain game is money, you're losing out on 90% of your audience.
It's pretty interesting though, right? Because I think that one of the things that Ryan is extolling is more maybe hybridization. Like hybridization where there's players that are maybe doing a little bit of each. I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, if you can like harness the aspects of both, right? So like that, those traders, those capital providers actually bringing in revenue into your game, and then actually helping to subsidize for the other players who want to play for fun and the like.
Yeah,
right? And it doesn't have to be in this kind of scholar relationship as hitherto, right? It can be in a different kind of form, right?
Yeah, you definitely need the economics to work, and people will have different incentives. Making games is hard. It's just not a magic sauce you can just sprinkle on it. You always have to like follow the fun. It's very squirrely, so it's definitely not an easy answer.
You might have to follow White Rabbit even.
Nice. Good plug. So I did want to say from the perspective of alpha that, if you consult that radar, it's clear that $7.6 billion of investment went into Web3 gaming in 2022. It appears that almost $20 billion of investment in total has gone into Web3 gaming, right? And I think one of the really interesting things is, of course, that people at the moment are kind of complaining of where are the hits, right? But I think that there's a really safe answer to this. And I think one of the things that's nice is that, a number of us are actually privy to a lot of the pipeline of games that haven't been shipped yet. And like, from my perspective, like, there's definitely ample games that look pretty amazing and incredibly fun. So to me, I think I have this saying, which is that if the games that come out of this exercise are less fun than watching VCs go into the desert and burn $20 billion of cash in a pile, then all those VCs,
or a cage match or something.
Then all those VCs should be fired. Yeah, or like the Elon Mark Zuckerberg cage match. If it's less fun than that, then all the VCs should be like sacked, right? Because that's probably what they should have done in the first place, right? Which is, burn all the money. So, I think that's my kind of hot take, which is I do think that the fun is coming. And I think that'll be a big game changer.
Well, otherwise your players are just, it'll disappear. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's like $7 billion went into games. Some of them got to be good. It's good argument.
That's a whole lot of spaghetti on the wall.
That's the alpha. Yeah, no, but I think, it relates to the nature of kind of hit games, right? Which is hit gaming is super hard. Gaming is very hits driven. And so like, it's not like, there's very rare people like record producers who can just like listen to a demo tape and be like, that's a hit. That's going to be a hit song, right? Like very few people in gaming are able to do this either, by the way.
Well, we cancel a lot of projects intentionally. So it's a lot of exploration and a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff. I don't know. I can't remember recent numbers, but it doesn't surprise me if you like greenlight 1 out of 10, right? Of things that are in your studio that are going. So that's it. So you need that breadth. It isn't just like one game. Okay, that's going to work.
Sherwin?
Well, what I was going to say was I'm not sure we can say it's a given that some of these games are going to be fun, right? There's no promise of that, right? But I think what is a fair analogy is to say, the first wave of games that came to mobile were mostly terrible, right? Because they tried to port the familiar PC and console experience directly to mobile, right? But I think it took people a while to figure out. It wasn't until like the Supercells and the Kings was that
Angry Birds, actually.
Yeah, and the Rovios of the world,
good.
was that the form factor that mobile and by extension free to play enabled required just kind of like a different format of game that looked different than everything that came before, right? If you had like thought about Candy Crush or whatever on the PC, it's like, no, why would I ever play that game? But it was like the perfect thing for mobile, right? So I think we're actually, my opinion is, for Web3, if we draw the free to play analogy, we might still be in that part where we're just trying to port things from Web 2 into Web3 one for one.
For sure.
And we're still waiting for that, whatever the Web3 King or Rovio or Supercell is. That's like, it's a different kind of game that looks different than what came before.
Yeah, and I think
That's
just to
gonna blow it out
add,
of
you
the
know, if you
water.
think about like early iPhone, like a lot of people had D-pads, you know, the transparent D-pad on the device, and how unsatisfying that was. But then with Angry Birds, it's like, oh, well, I swipe and I like sling the slingshot, or I'm tapping directly on the screen. So think about that in terms of your gameplay.
But it was
so-
not. Oh, sorry, not to cut you off.
Yeah.
Please.
I just wanted to make a comment here on like a difference between like the design side of things, like the gameplay, right? So Web3 mechanics, and then sort of like the economics or incentives behind like the game, right? So like free to play is LTV greater than CAC, right? Then you can think about how like Web3 can actually affect that, right? Or affect your business model. So I think Web3 is pretty, and this is sort of like to tie it into the next conversation
Yeah,
on UGC. It's like free naturally suited to creating UGC flywheels.
Mhm.
Right? That's gonna be interesting.
Ooh, I
part
want to
of-
go
Yeah.
there. Nicole,
Yep, Nicole, please.
respond.
Oh yeah, well, just real quick. Yeah, well, it's sort of like, you know, we're going technology, you know, when we want to go right to money, right? And then there's, you know, just jump right over the player to money.
Money's great.
And yeah, money is
You know,
good, but I think a lot
175
of, if
billion.
you think about what a lot of the discussion is around the finances, which is good. But why don't we just walk back a bit? This is something I do with a lot of our clients. I do game workshops and stuff with a lot of leading, you know, publishers and startups. And just walk it back. It's like, well, what does decentralized mean? Like, what kind of game mechanics would decentralized, you know, work with? What kind of new things could you do? Think about the intersection between, like, you know, crafting and decentralized, or they think about like, well, what if Roblox were on the chain? What are some other, you know, other things? And that decentralized property doesn't have to be just ownership, right? It doesn't have to be just like, okay, I've got a certificate, I've got a license to have fun, or I have a license that I had fun at this concert, right? You want, well, what other things? And that, the people that crack that nut, that get new kinds of mechanics that are fun in a decentralized manner, or leverage some property of decentralized, those are going to be the Angry Birds and the Candy Crush of Web3.
So before we go to UGC, I just wanted to kind of throw Ryan a bone, since I threw him under the bus, right? Which is that to me, one of the really interesting mechanics that I think is worthwhile, and Nicole can either like rebut or what I'm saying, or she can maybe agree, right? Which is that one of the mechanics that I think is really interesting within the world of fun and within the world of games. So, you know, when my partner came in from Tokyo, like, me and my San Francisco partner and him all went to like a sports bar, and we actually watched this kind of Japan versus USA, like baseball, right? And one of the things I realized is that baseball is really like a game of hopium, right? Like you're watching. And as you're watching, like a lot of the game is just waiting for something, right? And what are you waiting for? Is you're waiting for this amazingness, right? And in a way, the thing that's kind of interesting is that, like, in a way, the kind of mechanics around gambling, or the mechanics around money, like there is an element where the gambling quality has a hopium quality to it, that people are hoping that something happens, right? And so there's something maybe mixed in there. It's not all evil. So
Diablo is a similar mechanic, right? Where
Diablo
you're
is
waiting for loot.
very casino.
World of Warcraft, even, right? You go into a raid, even though there is kind of the collaboration, all that loot. Once a week,
Yeah. So I had
right?
this whole model. I think Nicole might appreciate this, which is so people talk about dopamine, right? So and so people also talk about this concept of hopium, right? Right. So I invented a thing called hopamine. And hopamine is these short hopes, right? Right? Because hopium is like long hope, like
Micro hopes.
these really short-term hopes, right? Hopamine. Yeah. So anyhow, I invented this new compound. But I wanted to get to UGC since it's super important, right? Because when you think about the economics, the question is I describe the entertainment industry as pay to be entertained, right? So the thing that's super interesting, Sherwin was talking about social dynamics and flywheel, right? And network effects that accrue, right? When Alice and Bob and Charlie are all kind of connected together through the gameplay, right? So the thing that gets super hype is this idea of UGC. And I think the other dimension that I think boosts UGC or user generated content is really this kind of generative AI booster, right? So to me, this mixture of kind of permanent internet assets / NFTs plus kind of like generative AI boosters that allow people to trivially generate fairly complex, beautiful artifacts, right? And then the idea that Alice can actually entertain Bob and Charlie, and that Bob and Charlie can actually put more money into the game world as a function of stuff that Alice is doing. This is kind of like, this is a real sustainable economy, right? Because it means that unlike Steppen, where you're walking around and entertaining nobody, right? Alice is now spending time in the game to build game assets and entertain Bob and Charlie, right? So that economic is very, very interesting. So, Ryan.
So thinking more, so when I think of Web3 games, I think less of Call of Duty, right? I think more of games like Roblox, right? Where, there's incentivization for the creators themselves to come up with these experiences. There's discoverability for those experiences, the ones that obviously monetize the best, right? Can afford to pay for ads and the like. So the thing about like UGC in particular, right, is that, as you said, like Alice can entertain Bob, right? But now there is a framework by which like Alice can be rewarded for that, rather than just like, she's doing it just for fun, right? It's fun for her too, but that's a reward on top of that.
Yeah. That's really like, it's seriously related to Sherwin's flywheel, right? Because if it's fun and kind of like economically beneficial, it kind of creates a super heavy flywheel, right? Because I think when we look at kind of like heavy flywheel genres, right? Like we all understand, for example, stuff like MMO, right? Like MMO, mega heavy flywheel, right? Now, obviously when it spins, you're like deliriously happy, but it's spun. How many MMOs have spun in the history of like the entire industry? Maybe 8? 5?
You mean mega hits
EverQuest,
or
megas, like the
Yeah.
big.
It's,
Final
it's around.
Fantasy,
It's
big
probably
MMOs.
around 10 to 12. But
Yeah, right. That's about it, right? So so it's super hard to spin, but it's really interesting to contemplate the impact of something like UGC, especially when coupled with, because the thing that happens is that the evil economics of kind of payment become less evil if people are being paid to entertain.
Yeah, they're paying
Sherwin,
other
go
people.
ahead.
Well, if they're
Oh no, I thought you had something.
I did, but you guys said.
Well, I just want to say that it's actually not, finance is only evil when you talk about, we haven't used the acronym KPI yet. So KPIs are also going to change. And if your finance is only evil, if that's your only goal, and that KPI, like, all right, finances got to go up, and our finances go up, then we got to have, our retention's got to go up or whatever. Yeah, sell more skins, sell more hats and whatever. But that, but again, it's like, well, what is the fun? And if you're there, like, games are simplified work, and they're self enjoyment. They're intrinsically rewarding, not extrinsically rewarding. And on the practical side, if you want to create some of these, I don't know, flywheels, I don't like that term too much, game loops. If you want to create these game loops that really engage players for long periods of time, then I go back, with Raph and all those other folks from the early MMO days, is that you want to have user-generated content. And there's more of this on my TED Talk, but it's UGC ETT. So it's user-generated content and experiences, right? And then tools and templates. So as a platform, you want to provide tools and templates, and of course a marketplace to sell them, because I want to be able to make an escape room game for my friends. And if it's really good, I want to be able to like sell tickets. And if it's really good, I want to franchise it. And so my friend Susan can sell tickets, and then you've got this whole, these whole player economies that are on top of this. People don't realize, may not remember back into the original Sims, but Will Wright gave a great talk at GDC on what percentage of the content for the original Sims was created by EA. What do you think?
20.
Very close. Yeah, very close. It was actually, 30. So 70% of
Wow.
the 70% of the content for the original Sims was created by players. And they weren't allowed to sell the content, but they created this pyramid of engagement. So basic players, and then people who played a lot, people who created content, people who created stores to sell the content for in-game currency or whatever. And that helped the Sims become some of the franchise that it is.
I think this link between Web3 and how much it really enables what we talk about when we think of UGC is very, very underappreciated. Like Ryan, you talked about Roblox, right? And I would argue that like Roblox is still a even though it is obviously UGC and creators monetize, it's still like a one level. I'm the first party creator of an asset and I sell it to someone else. What Web3 enables are things like, there's this token standard. I think it came out around the same time as GameSpeed Summit. It was called like ERC 2981. And it creates a framework by which creators can monetize secondary sales of their assets too, right? And just think about how important that is. Like we live in an age where, like remixing, right, is such an important part of the economy, right? Think about like memes, think about like TikTok duets, right? Those are all things where the original creator of something didn't see a single cent of like their creation going viral, right? Imagine, I don't know, like the guy drinking cranberry juice to like Fleetwood Mac, right? Like I'm sure he didn't get like any monetization off of like how viral that video went, right? But Web3 enables things like this with things like smart contracts. And I think that is vastly, vastly underappreciated.
So I wanted to kind of cue a little bit off of this idea that Nicole injected, which is the idea that if the sole purpose is greed, right? I think that in a way, I was actually down at GameSpeed in LA, and one of the speakers on stage had just raised $55 million in a Series A. And his attitude towards Web3 was, well, you don't want to be playing bullshit bingo and you don't want to be pitching Web3 because I talked to the gamers and the gamers aren't asking for Web3, right? Which is really, really funny to me. And the reason why I say it's funny to me is that just like Nicole said, like the gamers aren't asking for assembly language gaming or C# gaming, and they're not asking for TCP/IP gaming, right? They're not asking for, but to me, the thing that's really funny is that person who turned around and raised that much money is actually part of the problem and not part of the solution, which is that the people who need Web3 the most are actually indie game developers and are developers who can't raise $50 million at the drop of a hat. And the thing that I think is fascinating is that Nicole was talking about cancellation. Right now, if you look at the history of, so I read this great book I highly recommend called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels that documents kind of the history of the game industry and how games are made. And there's this thing called crunch, right? And crunch is basically like, okay, we're about to ship a game. Everybody work 17-hour days, until you're good, until you die, right? And then until we ship, right? So that's called crunch.
Get fired.
You die or we ship. One of the
two. So it's do or die, do or die, do or die, right? So here's the funny part and the terrible part of the game industry, right? Which is that what is acceptable to humans is do or die. That's a given, right? So people can accept do or die. What they can't accept is do and die, right? And the game industry has delivered that time and again, which is people have crunched and they've been punished, right? So I think right now the thing that happens is that, an EA executive shows up and says, well, my spreadsheet says your game will fail. You 700 people are canceled, go home, right? And the thing that's crazy becomes like in the Web3 world, so here's a really crazy notion, right? Which is that part of the flywheel that I think is so exciting is actually the crypto flywheel itself, right? Which is that what happens if we have an Ethereum blow off top or Ethereum goes to 50,000 USD, right? The thing that happens is that you have people like Vitalik Buterin who will be cosmologically rich, who essentially created Ethereum because he was sick of World of Warcraft being manipulated by a centralized group, right? So essentially what I'm saying is that boomers, when they got rich, produced movies, right? But I think if crypto people get rich, they're going to produce games, right? They're going to fund games. They're going to buy expensive NFTs. They're going to become producers, right? So I feel like the problem that NFT and blockchains are solving is it's distribution, but it's also things like game funding. Right? More like Kickstarter. So it's not a problem that gamers are having of like, oh, games aren't fun until we have NFTs. It's a problem of both distribution and it's a problem. These are industry problems and the industry is broken.
Well, there's some really interesting stuff related to what Sherwin was saying, actually, because we didn't bring up, he mentioned the word smart contracts, but we've only said that once. I think that's worth repeating again. So decentralized, another tenet of this new technology is smart contracts. So what could go into a contract? What kind of interesting mechanics could go into that contract? We have obviously the original creator could be, compensated for subsequent sales, like in the NFT space. Lots of other things that could be happening, in that contract. And again, it's really got to be all about delivering value to the player. And a lot of people, for a lot of it, it's fun.
But I think the cool point about this becomes that if the people are bankrolling games, they're doing so because they love and they trust the game developers and the designers, and they become a part of this, right? Because in a sense, like the idea is, if you look at Ready Player One, the enemy is Nolan Sorrento, who's a suit, right?
Yeah, or Free Guy.
Absolutely. So the idea becomes like at ETH Denver, we gave a talk called "Why Gamers Hate NFTs," and the correct answer is that they actually don't hate NFTs. They actually hate greed and suits.
Yep. They just saw it as a money grab, not a player value, right? It's not going to give me something new I can't do. It's just going
so when Ubisoft releases Ghost Recon NFT, like everybody is like, okay, what is this? This is greed and this is suits, which is completely rejected, right? Whereas
if Will Wright comes out and he says, I'm gonna make a new Sims game outside of EA,
people will buy that.
I need some funding, here's some NFTs.
Yes.
I'm sure,
Yeah. And so if you look at Kickstarter isn't greed and suits. Kickstarter's love. Like Kickstarter's like, you are great. I want to see this game. I can't wait. Here's some money.
And I think too, in the game industry, the players have been burned before by new technology. They still haven't forgiven us for free to play.
False armor.
Just truth here. Just truth.
That's amazing. Well, good. So, I feel like we've used a chunk of time, hopefully reasonably well. For me, would love to have any kind of audience questions if there are. If there aren't, you can play your crickets. Oh, it looks like we got one back here. So feel free to direct the question either at a specific panelist or in general, and we'll all do our best.
Does this work?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm curious why we haven't heard anything about Counter-Strike. I think that's a very interesting case because the in-game economy of Counter-Strike is billions of dollars of resale value. There's many teams just basically built around the skins. It's all on Valve servers, which I think is a primary use case that could be blockchainized. And they also moved to free-to-play. So I think that's a very interesting case study. I would like to know, do you think there's a chance, I think for Nicole probably, do you think there's a chance they're going to ever move to blockchain, or is Valve just going to keep that for themselves?
I have no insight into the minds at Valve. So, but I can say that what I can say is that if your blockchain solution, if your technology is not, if your Web3 is not interoperable, which means multiple companies, then it's just smart, it's just complicated crypto. It's just encryption, right? If that hat in, Counter-Strike, whatever, can't move between, then it's just
sparkling databases. Yeah.
Oh, very good. They're not from the decentralization region of France, but
there you go.
The point I want to make just quickly on that topic was that if you actually trace the history of the Wax blockchain, which I, by the way, is kind of done and dusted, so I'm not a proponent of it, but if you look at the history of it, it actually was the team behind Opskins, right, which is sort of the world's largest skins marketplace for Counter-Strike. So if you kind of look at the history of the Wax token, it kind of was an attempt to sort of try to decentralize this marketplace for these kinds of game assets. I think that pattern is eventually a very, very important and significant pattern. And I think, speaking to Nicole's notion of interop, I do believe that there will be some kind of game asset marketplace that will be neutral, right? That will host game assets from a variety of sources. And I think that such a marketplace may include Web2 game assets as well as Web3 game assets. I actually met a hacker who actually used server mechanisms to generate Web2 game assets and then sold them on eBay and other places. This hacker actually generated as much as $60,000 a day, basically counterfeiting digital assets. So that was quite an amazing.
So I have a direct answer to your question, right? Which is that Valve already is making all the money it wants in the world. It doesn't need to be on Web3. It already has built all the technology it needs to have marketplaces. It doesn't need to open up to anyone else, like its skins and the like, right? So where it has benefit is for new games that want to sort of lean into this, right? And it makes basically a promise that you could never re-centralize your game assets. I think that's kind of the interesting part. But for Valve, I think that story is, as they say, done and dusted. Yeah. Hope that answers the question.
Cool. Question over here.
Hi, yeah, I'm part of a small indie team, and we have a game in Decentraland that we've built, been running for about 3 years, and it's actually super popular in Decentraland. With over half the players there play our game every day, and that sounds great. But what's happening, or what has happened, is it's very much platform dependent how many players we get. It's a fantastic environment. It's like a microcosm of everything you guys have talked about already. The NFTs, the social network effects, the self-expression, the user-generated content, it's all there. So it's a great testing world. But at the same time, we think we have a really nice game. We've gone from about 10K DAU to about 1,000 DAU, mostly based on metaverse hype going up and down, the Decentraland mana token, crypto going up and down. And as those things go up and down, so do our users. So just wondering if you have advice and what's it going to take for blockchain game developers to expand beyond the platforms that they're tied to and beyond the crypto hype cycle.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is a super important principle, which I think relates to what we were alluding to earlier, which is this idea that the crypto flywheel and the Web3 gaming flywheel are kind of tied together, right? So in a sense, the thing that becomes interesting is that, if you look at the idea that Ryan was talking about Web3 as a platform, it's almost like a new console, right? And I think Nicole was talking about this as like the concept of, hey, we have like the iPhone, and then Angry Birds. And so it's kind of Sherwin's idea of like, well, so what is the Angry Birds of blockchain, right? Which is the evolution of this combination. But I think one of the really shocking things that we don't have, which Nicole was pointing out of the value of, is interop, right? So it means that you're on, as a blockchain game, you're on a blockchain. But being on a blockchain means that you're kind of, if that blockchain's token does really well, then your game is more likely to do well, right? Because the rich people in the ecosystem will probably, support you better, right? So in a sense, like it isn't even, Web3 isn't even a giant flywheel. It's just lots of little deep fragmented money spinners, right? So, but one of them could win. Maybe it's Aptos.
Yeah, I was at Apple Park, for the announcement a couple of weeks ago, and I think Web3 would need apples to join the game, because what they do is they simplify everything, right? They do just a few things and then just do it extremely well. So on one hand, when crypto is easy as PayPal, then I think that's going to be a real turning point. And then when the experiences that I can have there are as mass market as Angry Birds. So Angry Birds was simple, right? It had if you could open your iPhone, which was what you had at the time, you had to swipe in order to unlock the iPhone. You could play Angry Birds, and it appealed the world and everything that appealed. I mean, essentially, it's a carnival game. It's where you do the slingshot. You throw something at milk bottles. That's the basic mechanic. And so the gameplay was something not for hardcore gamers at all, right? The success of it was because it could be everyone could play. And in fact, when we do a lot of player testing, and if I'd say like, do you play games? And they would say, no, I don't play games. It's like, what's this Angry Birds doing on your phone? You know, they didn't even think of themselves as gamers. So I think we need some of those mechanics if you want to go up the technology adoption curve to mass market. We're still in that innovator and early adopter phase, and we haven't crossed the chasm yet.
I mean, I do think that there is one little hope around fragmentation, which is that there are lots of really strong advancements in cross-chain interop, right? So we are seeing kind of a lot of things like ZK proofs and cross-chain state proofs that are kind of enabling new forms of decentralized interop across blockchain, which I think is promising, right? So, you know.
Yeah, but to do games, we have to be interoperable, like to your point before, like how do we move something? And I was very remiss in not mentioning this point, which is that in games, if I have a sword and then I take it from Zelda into, Dragon Age or something, that totally messes with the game balance. So the things that'll jump first for games that'll be interoperable are probably going to be cosmetics. Yeah, so things that have no gameplay value, but are you're the way your avatar looks, something like that. Or there could be some kind of currency exchange, and maybe it's even not through a direct port, but you have to like go to a marketplace and then buy sell your WoW gold for your Counter-Strike gold, and to buy that and then buy into that. But that again, the interoperability is going to be key for as we see what we use crypto for right now.
Okay, a couple more. There's one here first.
So I have a response to your question directly, right? About how about you can do as a game developer on Decentraland, and as Miko was saying, like it's reflexive according to the ecosystem, right? That's one thing. But the second thing you can do is, to petition the ecosystem for, hey, look, this is our game is successful. You've got a lot of treasury. Let me put in with the ecosystem that you're currently housed in, which is Decentraland and the like, right? Another thing you could do is to go look towards other ecosystems and say, hey, look, we've got this game that's performing really well, right? According to our metrics, right? We are half the users on this platform. We need a better, bigger platform, right? Could you help us with user acquisition, the like? Let's partner up on that front, then get more funding in that way to expand your game. So I think those are the possibilities in the space.
Thank you for giving the commercial for me. I appreciate it.
I like that. Yeah, go ask Rowan for big grants.
Thank you so much for for sharing these inside thoughts. And my question is actually related to my background. So I'm a musician, and I guess many of us like recognize that music is very important for like gaming, especially. So I was wondering, like, what do you guys think about the future of music in terms of like Web3 gaming? So are there any things that we can do to make users or developers or creative teams' life better with the Web3 infrastructures, or just music for gaming in general? Thank you.
Ooh, I have an answer for this one. I've actually been advising this company that does something in the space. And sorry, sir, what's your name?
Yihao.
Yihao.
Yeah.
Yihao, have you ever you said you were a musician?
Yeah.
Have you ever have you ever like made games for like a video? Have you ever made music for a video game or like been part of any of that ecosystem?
No, unfortunately, I'm not. I'm more like a traditional composer.
So from what I understand, right? And actually, has anyone here ever like been like part of sound design for a video game or like worked with that at all? Or maybe... sorry.
Yeah, design the music. You would design this. She said that you were designing the music around the environment. It's all the sound design is always about that. Yeah. And I would just say also haptics.
Yeah. So one of the things that I understand to be true about games, music in the game industry, right, is people who work in game, like the music industry is this incomprehensible yarn ball of like, legal contracts, whatever, right?
It's actually not even, you don't own the music, you license, you actually insure your company. When you buy music, you insure your company that you're not going to get sued for using the music you just licensed. Yeah. It's an insurance policy.
So there's some of that. And then even if you find the right person to license the music too, there's like 5 people you need it, like the owner of the sheet music versus the owner of the song versus the owner of the performance versus there's like 5 different people you need to contact, right? And Nicole, we talked about like smart contracts here before. I feel like that is a really good, like just very complicated legal hoo-ha is a really good use case of Web3, whether it's like insurance contracts or music rights or IP and things like that. And so, I actually know this company called Plus Music, which is trying to do something around Web3 or AI, where they're cutting music into parts that are matched to emotional moments in a game. So this is a moment of tension. This is a victory moment, something like that. And it plays the part of the song mapped to that moment, and it has a system where it's like simplified the music rights, so you can find one song and purchase it, and it does all the right stuff in the background, potentially via smart contracts. So I definitely see it as a potential use case.
Yeah, there is some really interesting things that are happening in music where it's keyed to gameplay that is either like almost generative AI, or something where it's moving based on what the player's doing, which is really good. The other thing to think about though as a musician is that one of the use cases, if you remember like UGC ETT, it's these experiences, and one of the more popular experiences in Roblox, for example, are these huge concerts. And so when you're getting, so it's a limited time thing, you had to be there. And so there's some really interesting things for generating, for creating experiences around music.
I just wanted to also make the case for live music. I think live music is super interesting because to me, live music, the thing that makes live music really interesting is that I'm kind of conjecturing about the future of the emergence of like massive AI. And I think massive AI has kind of the tendency to basically crush the middle, right? So you're kind of either like yo-yo ma, or you're basically like crushed, right? And like the thing that's really interesting about the idea of live music, right, is that like it creates a lot of space for a lot of people, right? Because the thing that's really interesting is it swings closer to folk music, which I think is something that people actually might enjoy, and they might actually enjoy interacting with like the actual live musician, because to me, the thing that like, if you think about something like Etsy, right? Etsy isn't really art, it's craft, right? And I think that as AI comes and like annihilates a lot of art, like craft is actually going to rise, right? Which is like, so Etsy is going to rise because somebody made this thing, this physical object for me personally, and like they made it to my specification. It makes people feel good that there's care, right? That someone put care into this. So I feel like live music is the same idea. It's craft, and it's sort of somebody sharing of themselves, as opposed to like, oh, a machine composed this somewhere, like, which just feels bad or feels different anyway.
So on the point of view of Gen AI, like sort of flooding everything and making us all worthless and crushed under like bugs, right? Only the best. So unless you're Yo-Yo Ma, right? Same thing for art, like just regular art, and art created post Gen AI, like post Midjourney, post 2021, 2022 is gonna be it's gonna be flooded. The chain's gonna be flooded with NFTs from randomly generated stuff. But you know what's scarce? NFTs from before 2021.
Oh, wow.
That's all.
Yeah, hold those now. They're going the same value as my Beanie Babies, my pet rocks were. But actually, no, Miko. I mean, nothing to do with Web3, but I think it's just interesting because I almost feel like I go the opposite direction with like crafted AI music. Like there's this, artists that we know today, right, have like tens of thousands of hours of like unreleased tracks, right, that like the public has never heard before, different versions of songs, etc. And there's startups working on things that are like training, LLMs on like that data, and so you'll be able to say like, hey, I really like music by some other artist, but like give me a Beatles song, but in the style of like, but as if like Taylor Swift was singing it, right? And so it's like this very personalized, crafted kind of like music. And when you bring up live music, I think it's a potential future we're getting in, where it's like you and I both like Taylor Swift, but our experience of Taylor Swift is very different because Gen AI has like fed us different songs, all in the style of Taylor Swift, but like, I whatever like happy songs and you like sad songs. And so we'll both be at a Taylor Swift concert and we'll be like, what the hell is this? This is very different than like the Taylor Swift that both of I know. And so there's no more like unified experience anymore.
There'll be craft, but no culture.
Yeah,
there's no shared culture.
Right. Like part of the thing about live music is it's this shared experience where we all go and we all know the songs and we all sing along, and it's this very bonding moment. But like it's possible that it goes the other way, and it's like
and that was only possible because of the record industry, starting in the 40s and 50s, right? Because there was only one version of that song, right?
So,
and everyone sang to it. But look at just one more thing is that if we thought you brought up the cost of, so there's two things difference between Web 2 and Web 3. In Web 2, what happened is that the cost of distribution, went to zero. And so now with AI and generative AI, maybe Web 3 is that the cost of creation is going to zero. So that's a rather interesting thing to think about, like what would be the, the YouTube moment for Web 3.
And just as a capstone, I really just wanted to say that the biggest difference to me between Web3 gaming and Web2 gaming is that basically in Web2 gaming, the games own the player, and in Web3 gaming, the players own the game. So I think that, I think Web3 gaming obviously has a very bright future. I'm wondering if we have time for one. Maybe Michael in the
We'll
back.
take one more question, and yeah, we'll take him. Sorry, we don't have. But if you want to do a 30-second speech, you can.
We'll,
Or you
yeah.
can they'll stay around. You can get to them. Was it here?
Hey, so I played competitive Super Smash Bros. For a while, and I kind of want to talk a little bit. Sorry, what? I play Cloud in Super Smash Bros. Oh, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Yeah. So I kind of want to speak a bit to the Web2 community. Kind of talking to a lot of them, seems to be a lot of resistance against crypto. A lot of them kind of see it as this, kind of glorified gambling with extra steps, and they especially see proof of work is damaging to the environment. At one point, we had Coinbase sponsor a lot of our tournaments. We had like a weekly tournament where it was Coinbase sponsored, and everyone just kind of accepted that we're just taking the money because we need it, but we don't really like crypto. So it kind of seems like the sentiment in this Web2 community is that we don't like crypto. We're just kind of accepting the money because it's there. And I do feel that's kind of shared with other Web2 communities like League of Legends and Fortnite and things like that. So I guess my question is two-pronged. Like, do you think there is an attempt in the Web3 community to kind of integrate these Web2 communities that have resistance against crypto? And do you guys feel like yourselves as leaders, do you want to integrate the Web2 community at all?
So I think mass adoption is deeply dependent on our ability to integrate Web2 community. And so for me, it's necessary. I think if you actually look at the upper funnel of blockchain gaming or Web3 gaming, it's basically it's identical to free to play, right? Which is basically it's free to play, right? Then it becomes sort of free to own. Then it becomes play to own. Right. So the upper funnel is actually going to be indistinguishable. I think the wallet will initially start fully custodial. So the idea of, it's an in-game digital asset, like it's not going to be like, store your seed phrase. Right. So like at some point, like people start to realize that like, I actually own this in-game asset and I can sell it back for USD and this kind of thing. Eventually they'll be happy. Right. But I think according to like what Nicole was saying, like, it's not like, this is an NFT or this is a blockchain. Like people don't even need to care. Right. They just need to get the benefits of it.
They just want to have fun.
And people don't even care if games made in Unity or Unreal Engine, right? For example. So in the same way, like blockchains can really be like mostly a back-end technology, and that's fine, right? And in the future, they might be like, hey, they're happy that it happens. The thing about Web2 gamers as well, like sort of being the ones that adopt. So Web2 gamers, yes, they are a large portion of gamers out there, but they're also like gamers who don't have an opinion at all and they just play whatever's fun, right? As Nicole was saying, or whatever's like trending, whatever's exciting, right? And I think although there are like some vocal folks, that doesn't mean that they're the folks that are going to be the only ones who dictate like what games get played. So I think it is a good and important thing to integrate, right? But the games are going to get made regardless. Yeah. And there's going to be new streamers and new adopters and just like how whenever the new game is made, right, there's going to be a new set of streamers who actually sort of make their name through the game, right, for example. So that's kind of my response to that. Yeah.
So you kind of think like the stigma is just going to dissolve as like the fun of the games goes to Web3 or something like that?
Yeah.
Or we transition to something new and we don't talk about it like the business model. We do talk about free-to-play games as a genre, as a genre of games, but it's not from the player's perspective. They don't think of it as free-to-play. They think of it as Candy Crush or a combat thing or Clash of Clans, Clash of Clans. Yeah,
it's more like a business model than a genre.
Yeah, like imagine, you were trying to get someone into Ultimate, right? And the first thing you showed them was like, oh yeah, this is like, MK Leo versus Riddles. They'd just be like, this is so, and you used a bunch of like really insane like Smash jargon, right? They would just be so turned off by it. I think we as an industry in Web3 did ourselves a huge disservice because the first wave of Web3 games that came out there, instead of trying to take gamers and onboard them onto Web3, we took like Web3 degens and tried to convert them into gamers, And I think that was just like completely the wrong end of the telescope to be looking out, right? So I think hopefully things are better. And like you said, games are focused on, the fun and the enjoyment of it, because the truth of the matter is, I completely agree with Miko. No one cares about what, I say this working at a layer 1 blockchain. No one cares about what chain your game is built on, right? People care that your games are fun. Just like when you're using an iPhone app, people do not give a shit if it's on. Like, I've never used an iPhone app and been like, oh yeah, AWS is the shit. Like that just never happens, right? You care about the experience. The infrastructure layer should remain on the infrastructure and just enhance the.
You want it to be. You want it to be novelty. You want it to be exploration and role play, curiosity, wonder, surprise. You want to have like challenges and goals, and frustration, and then fiero, the feeling of winning. Those are the kinds of the flow of experiences in response to you as the player making choices. Otherwise, you might as well just watch a movie.
That's what fun is. Just to summarize.
And there are only 4 kinds of fun.
Those are
Just
the 4
4.
kinds. Alejandra?
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So if you didn't get to ask your question, they'll be here still for a little bit. There's still drinks, so make sure you grab a drink after. And there's still food, so make sure to not leave until you at least talk to one person. Also, if you are interested in becoming a volunteer for Crypto Underground, you get to organize all these fun events. You can help us come up with exciting topics. So if you are interested, come up to me. I would love to hear from you. Also, we always like to end it with 30-second pitches. If you are new to the city, if you are looking for a co-founder, if you want to show yourself, you can come up and show yourself. 30 seconds. This is your time.